kind people don't usually see it coming. They help, they listen, they forgive, they give second chances, and slowly something shifts. Their time gets expected, their effort gets assumed, their boundaries get tested, until one day they realize they're exhausted, not because they gave too much love, but because someone kept taking. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Kindness doesn't protect you from being used. In fact, in certain psychological dynamics, it makes you a target. Not because kindness is weakness, but because unchecked kindness signals something to opportunistic minds. Today, we're breaking down the dark psychology behind why kind people get used the most. And by the end of this video, you'll understand how generosity, empathy, and patience, when unguarded, can invite exploitation. This isn't about becoming cold, it's about becoming aware. Stay until the end, because the last part might change how you define kindness forever. The first reason kind people get used is simple. They signal high tolerance. When you consistently forgive, accommodate, and give the benefit of the doubt, you communicate something subtle but powerful. You're unlikely to leave. To a healthy person, that feels safe. To an opportunistic person, that feels convenient. Dark psychology reveals that people test boundaries gradually. Rarely does someone exploit you immediately. They push a little, then a little more. They show up late. They cancel plans, they borrow without returning, they cross emotional lines, and if nothing happens, if there's no consequence, the brain registers permission. Kind people often prioritize harmony over confrontation. They tell themselves, it's not a big deal. But every small tolerance becomes data, and some people use that data strategically. Another reason kind people get used is because empathy makes them justify bad behavior. Empathy is powerful. It allows you to see someone's pain, their past, their stress. With the overrides discernment, it becomes self-sacrifice. And instead of saying, this behavior is unacceptable, kind people say, yeah, they're just going through something. Instead of recognizing manipulation, they look for trauma explanations. Dark psychology teaches that manipulators rely heavily on this dynamic. They reveal just enough vulnerability to trigger your compassion. They tell you about their difficult childhood, their stressful job, their fear of abandonment. Now your focus shifts from their behavior to their wounds. And while you're trying to heal them, they're benefiting from your patience. Empathy without boundaries becomes an invitation. Kind people also get used because they struggle with saying no. They don't want to disappoint. They don't want to appear selfish. They don't want to disrupt peace. But every time you say yes when you mean no, you teach people that your limits are flexible. Dark psychology recognizes that humans respect what resists them. When there's no resistance, there's no challenge. When there's no challenge, there's no recalibration of behavior. If someone asks for your time repeatedly and you always rearrange your schedule, they stop seeing your time as valuable. If someone disrespects you and you remain calm without addressing it, they stop seeing your standards as firm. Kindness becomes predictable, and predictability without consequences lowers perceived cost. There's also a deeper identity issue. Many kind people tie their self-worth to being needed. They feel valuable when they're helping, when they're supporting, when they're fixing. This creates a dangerous dynamic because if your identity depends on being the giver, you'll tolerate being drained. Dark psychology suggests that some personalities instinctively sense this. They identify who gains validation from giving and who gains validation from receiving. The relationship becomes imbalanced. You give because it makes you feel purposeful. They take because it makes them feel powerful. And neither person addresses the imbalance until exhaustion sets in. When kindness becomes a source of identity instead of a choice, it's easier to exploit. Another reason kind people get used is because they assume others think like they do. Projection is powerful. If you wouldn't manipulate someone, you assume they wouldn't manipulate you. If you wouldn't lie for advantage, you assume honesty is mutual. But not everyone operates from the same moral framework. Dark psychology acknowledges that some individuals calculate benefit first and empathy second. They assess what they can gain. If they realize you rarely push back, rarely demand reciprocity, rarely enforce consequences, you become a low-risk, high-reward connection. It sounds harsh, but opportunistic minds evaluate relationships strategically, and unchecked kindness lowers their perceived risk. Kind people also get used because they fear conflict more than they fear resentment. They'll swallow frustration to keep peace. They'll avoid difficult conversations to prevent discomfort. But resentment accumulates silently. Meanwhile, the other person interprets your silence as satisfaction. Dark psychology shows that when negative feedback is absent, behavior escalates. If no one corrects them, why would they change? Kind people often wait until they're overwhelmed before speaking up. By then, the dynamic is deeply ingrained. And when they finally set boundaries, the other person feels shocked because the behavior was normalized for so long. Delayed boundaries are harder to enforce. But here's the most important part. Kindness itself is not the problem. Unprotected kindness is. There's a difference between being compassionate and being compliant. Strong kindness has standards. It has limits. It can say no without guilt. It can walk away without hatred. Weak kindness seeks approval. It fears rejection. It tolerates imbalance to avoid loss. Dark psychology doesn't say stop being kind. It says understand human behavior. Some people respect kindness. Some people test it. Some people exploit it. Your job isn't to change who you are. It's to decide who gets access to your generosity. Because kindness without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. And the moment you abandon yourself, others learn they can too. So why do kind people get used the most? Because tolerance can look like permission. Because empathy can override discernment. Because saying yes feels easier than risking conflict. Because identity can become attached to giving. Because projection blinds you to strategic behavior. But here's the empowering truth. You don't have to become colder to stop being used. You have to become clearer. Clear about your limits. Clear about reciprocity. Clear about consequences. Kindness is powerful when it's chosen, not when it's automatic. When people know that your generosity is selective, not guaranteed, they treat it differently. Because what can be lost is respected, and what has standards is valued. The goal isn't to stop being kind, it's to stop being accessible to those who only take. If this made you reflect, sit with it, because the strongest form of kindness is the kind that includes yourself.